Yay! And let's just say when I'm not feeling like a full cup of self-love sharing the overflow, and I feel like a half-empty cup, which is every day, I do my transformational practices and processes to fill myself back up from the inside so that I'm not searching for things from the outside to fill me. And that's what a succulent does. A succulent plant gives itself nourishment from the inside and then feeds itself that nourishment. And in that way, succulence is powerful. And so are you. So, mid-1990s, I'm walking up a hill in San Francisco, and I come across a square in the cement where someone has etched into the cement, "Succulence is powerful." And I'm like, wow. And I jumped on the square. And I said, "Succulence is powerful, and so am I. And I'm going to write about being a succulent wild woman." And then I collapsed in fear. So let's time travel back to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I grew up, and where I came home in first grade and said, "Mom, show and tell should be me every day." And she said, "No, honey, the other kids need a chance." And I said, "No, they don't. They hate it. They're begging me to do it. And I'm always finding all these things to share, so it should be me." And luckily, I had a really neat mom and a really neat teacher, so they figured out a way for me to go to a different grade every day. So I always like to say it's where I got my speaker's training, because when you're in first grade and you're in front of the sixth graders, you have to be really good. And so that was a wonderful beginning. There was a lot of magic in my childhood and some tragic. And I experienced the tragic when my older brother, who had been my best friend for 7 years, started abusing me. And it was devastating, and I moved into my imagination and created a world to live in other than the one I was living in. I also built a little fort in the apple tree branches, and I climbed up there and was living inside my books. And we found out years later that he'd been abused by a next-door neighbor. And through a lot of self-healing and a lot of therapy and a lot of time, I've forgiven him and everyone involved. So I experienced the magic again when I was 10 years old, and I made best friends with a man in the neighborhood who was 80 years old. And it was a refuge. It was one of those places where I could go and feel safe. And his name was Mr. Boggs. And Mr. Boggs loved me. And he wanted to teach me to look close and to look far, so he bought me a microscope and a telescope. And I went over there every day. And then my mom said, "Mr. Boggs is going in the hospital, and he's probably not coming back. And you need to be ready." And I said, "Well, I need to make him something every day that he's in there so that he knows he's loved." And so for a month, every day, I sent something to Mr. Boggs. And he did get out of the hospital. And he said, "I think you saved my life." He said, "No one else called or wrote while I was in there, and I had to get out to see you." And I ran in the house and said, "Mom, I'm supposed to be a beacon of hope for the world and write books." And my mom said, "Eat your peanut butter sandwich." But I wrote my first book that summer of my 10th year. And I'm always fond of saying that the art in it is not very different than the art I do now. And so then I went on to a lot of wild living, a lot of adventures, a lot of self-destructive behavior, a lot of joy, a lot of procrastination, and a lot of hiding from that beacon of hope purpose. It's scary to be succulent. It's scary to live your purpose. It can be very scary. It's easier to not speak up. It's easier to be quiet and struggle and say that things are hard. It is. And it may not seem like it. Well, nobody wants to feel that way. Oh, yeah, you have a lot of people complaining with you. Luckily, succulence is powerful. It's so powerful. So it's like the dream keeps knocking. The purpose keeps knocking. The succulence keeps rising. You know, the juice, the succulence. So also, around that time in my mid-30s, I started having flashbacks to the incest, and it went on for 2 weeks, and I couldn't eat or sleep, so I attempted suicide. And luckily, it was not successful. And I came out of that, and I wrote in my journal a poem called How to Be an Artist. How to be an artist. And it was really my statement that we are all artists of life. And it says, stay loose. Learn to watch snails. Plant impossible gardens. Invite someone dangerous to tea. That's really succulent. Make little signs that say yes and post them all over your house. And then it goes on. And the friend said, wow, that should be a poster. So I tore it out of my journal and I put it on the wall in my magic cottage in San Francisco and said, there, now it's a poster. And he said, no, for the world. And then I uttered the words that so many have uttered to me. I wouldn't have any idea how to do that. Guess what? You can find out. I took this little crooked thing to a metaphysical store, and they put it in a catalog, and 4 days later, there were orders for hundreds. 5 days after that, an order for 500. I was writing these all by hand. I made 11,000. In case you doubt my commitment. And by then, I created 18 other posters and poems on 18 other life subjects. I thought I'd cover everything. How to really love a child. How to forgive your father. How to relax about money. How to be really alive. So now I was living that juicy, succulent purpose. I was starting to live it. The posters went on to be reprinted millions of times and went around the world. And I was like, I'm living my purpose now. I can feel it. And that's when I came across that square in the cement that said, succulence is powerful. So I did create that book. It is called Succulent Wild Woman. And it's my statement of self-liberation. Well, it was so much larger than that, because the next year, all the men came out for that book, and I wrote on the back, men are welcome in the land of succulent wild women. And they were there peering around the bookshelves, and, you know, they came out. So I wrote the next book for them. It's called the Bodacious Book of Succulence. And I profiled all the succulent wild men that I knew. But it was bigger than that, because it was the succulent wild people. It was everybody. And groups started forming all over the world, and people started connecting and inspiring each other. So now I was stepping fully. It wasn't just to write books. I stepped into my succulent purpose to be an uplifter, a transformer, and a laser beam of love. And I do that through my art and my words and my spirit. And now I have the privilege of sharing and showing others how to do that too. So I want to talk about ways you can expand, we can all expand our succulence. And the first way is to be in contact and connection with your inner, what I call your inner wise self. Some of you may call it your higher self. Some of you may call it your pure positive energy, the Holy Spirit. It doesn't really matter what the name is, but it matters how it feels. This is a part of you that came in when you were born and will be with you your whole life and beyond. It's like a giant super coach. And it's free. And, and most people know about it, but they're not using it. They're not activating it. There's lots of ways to activate it, but one of the easy ways that I want to share with you right now is to let your inner wise self write you a love note. It's like a 5-minute thing. And you might be wondering, well, I don't know. Some of you are like, I know how to do that. Others of you are, I don't know. So I brought along a love note from my inner wise self to read to you. It's a little embarrassing. My inner wise self is so in love with me. And uses such terms of endearment. I mean, it's really over the top. To my to my dearest and most ever-loving, radiant bundle called Susan. Doesn't it just feel so good? I adore your people-pleasing, ego-driven, emotional eating, strategizing for contact, and distancing from contact. I love your quests for being met and found and chosen. I love your yearnings. I accept and honor your sometimes fat-feeling stomach and out-of-controlledness in any and every dimension. I respect your dislikes, your distastes, and your exuberant welcomings in every way. I celebrate your allowings, your attendances, and your changeability. I trust you. I love you. You are divinely guided, deeply loved, and such a gift. Now, everyone can write a love note like that. And you may not know it right now, but when you let inner wise self write, the pen will move in ways that you did not know. And it just keeps getting better. And so that inner wise self, to activate and empower that. Next, self-love. Self-love and self-care. Let's be sure to say what self-love is and what self-love is not. It is not narcissism. It is not selfishness, self-absorption. What are the other ones? I don't know. Any of those. It's not those. Some years ago, I got into an elevator in New York City, and I was blinded by the radiance of a man in the elevator. I was knocked backwards. And I said, wow! I said, you have the best energy. And he said, thank you. I am so in love with myself. And I thought, can he say that? And then I thought, why am I not saying that? And I grew up in Minnesota. Some call it the state of denial. Well, it was not a state that you would go around saying, I am so in love with myself. So I started actively practicing. And let me tell you, you've got to choose your audience, but but self-care, people think self-care is bubble baths, yoga, and walks. Those are great. I love them. I do them all. But self-care is really having an inner feelings care system. Most people don't know how they feel. And if they do know, they don't know how to hold or have multiple feelings at one time. In my family growing up, you could have one feeling at a time. And you had to go to your room to have it. And then you had to come out feeling better. And you lied. Are you better now? Yeah. Most people have very active inner critics. And so the dialogue inside their head is very critical. And I maintain this is the foundation for everything of world change. Because everything about world change rises up the hopeless inner critic. That'll never work. We'll never be able to feed all those people. Never be able, the homeless are always going to, just hopeless. And having a feelings care system involves knowing how to dialogue with your inner critics and help them. Give them the love and support they're looking for and reassign them to new jobs. My perfectionist works in an egg factory, checking for broken eggs. There's a lot to do there. And let me just tell you, one of the simplest ways to care for your feelings, it's like 10 seconds, everyone here can do it, and it's simply to acknowledge and honor them when you feel them. So you're out for a walk and fear shows up. You're out for a walk, sadness shows up. You simply turn and say, sadness, I see you, I hear you, I acknowledge you. Sadness, shoulders come down. Oh, thank God somebody's listening. And sadness can soften and change shape. It's amazing. Third thing, miracles. You may or may not know I lived outside the money system before it was popular. I lived on barter and trade for 10 years. So I learned how to ask for and receive miracles. And I would go outside of where I lived and I'd have my hands out and say, "Miracle, find me now." And then I would tune my vision to see a miracle. It doesn't always look like what you think. And one of my favorite miracle stories, and this one's very obvious, but you'll love it. I was on a steep street where I was living. I had no money for the rent or food. And I said, "Miracle, find me now." And I saw what I thought was a leaf blowing up the street. And I reached down, and it was a $100 bill. And I was like, yeah. And then there were 5 more $100 bills. And someone said, "How long did you stand there and wait for more?" I said, "At least an hour." You got to help the miracles along. So succulence, live juicy. That's where the juice is. Succulence is powerful. I made up this quote that says, "The opposite of old is not young. The opposite of old is new." And as long as we continue to experience the new, we will gloriously inhabit all of the ages that we are. So what's new? What's you? And what's succulent? Succulence is powerful, and so are you.